everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we're doing my May wrap-up. This is going up a little bit later than intended because it is mid-June now, because I just have not been posting videos for the last like 2 weeks, but I am batch filming today, so hopefully I will be able to post more regularly, and I'm hoping to just in general be posting more regularly. I don't like it when I just kind of disappear for a week or two. So let's get started with this May wrap up. In May, I read, I counted the number of books like 5 seconds ago. I think it was 7 books. And I DNF'd 3 of them. So the 3 books that I DNF'd, first I have Beautiful Darkness by Fabian Vellman and Kerscott. And then I also DNF'd Kushil's Chosen by Jacqueline Carey and Trader's Moon by Lynn Flewelling. And I think this video is going up before my spring DNFs video, but either that's already up and I'll link it in the description, or it's going to be the next video coming after this one because I've already filmed it. So those were my DNFs. Now let's talk about the books that I actually did complete. So the first book that I finished in May was The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I started this in April and then finished it in May because it's a chunky book and it took me a while to get through it. So this is a standalone adult high fantasy. It's very popular on BookTube, so I'm sure you know what it's about, but just in case, this is set in a world that 1,000 years ago, essentially there was like a giant evil dragon that was trying to take over the world. Some people were able to stop it. They couldn't kill it, but they were able to trap it kind of in like a magical sleep, I think. And then from that event, different religions kind of sprung because there are some mysteries around what actually happened at that time and how that dragon was subdued, and so there are different interpretations of that historical event, and because of that there are these 2 different religions. Primarily it's East versus West. So in the West they believe that all dragons are evil and that the dragon was subdued by a saint, and so they have this religion that's kind of revolves around saints and knights and virtues, which is why their country is called Virtuedom. And they also believe that as long as someone from the bloodline of this saint is on the throne of their country, that they will be safe and this dragon will be gone and it won't be able to come back. Whereas in the East, they believe that there's a difference between fire dragons, which are the evil ones, and water dragons, which helped them to defeat this evil fire dragon that was trying to take over the world. And so they treat water dragons almost like gods, and they have like dragon riders and they worship dragons. And so each of these religions kind of views the other as heretics, and there's been very little contact between these 2 cultures for the last 1,000 years. At the current time that we're following in this story, it's been 1,000 years since that like original event. And now they're kind of worrying that this evil dragon might be coming back. And then the plot kind of turns into a fetch quest to collect these like items of power to help them defeat this evil dragon once and for all. In this, we're following 4 main perspectives. First is Tane, who is from the Eastern culture. She has been raised as a dragon rider. Her whole life she's been training, and the point at which we start her story, she's completed all of her training and she's about to go through all of the tests and trials to find out if she can actually join the dragon riders and bond with a dragon. Then another character that we're following is Eid, who is living in the West during the story, but she's actually from the South. She's part of the Priory of the Orange Tree, which is this like secret society that kind of is trying to protect the world, but also kind of has their own mysterious interests that they're trying to protect. But they have pretty much sent Eid to the West and sort of secretly placed her in the court in order to get close to the queen, to protect her, just in case their myth is true that as long as this queen is on the throne, their country is safe. So just in case that's true, Eid is protecting the queen. And then we have two characters who have been exiled from the West. One of them is a friend of the queen who, without her knowledge, was exiled by another member of her court because they believed that his friendship with the queen was a political disadvantage, and so he was sent away. And then the other exile is an alchemist who years ago angered the queen, and she exiled him because she doesn't like him, and now he's living in the East. So those are the four main perspectives that we're following in this. And this book, I think I talked about this in a currently reading where I said that I liked this about as much as I had expected, but not as much as I'd hoped, which is very vague, but I still think holds true. And that's because I have read another book from Samantha Shannon. Years ago, I read The Bone Season, I think like around when it first came out. And I was very lukewarm about it. I didn't really like it that much. And so I haven't read anything else from her until this point, but I wanted to give this book a try. And I think overall it was fine. For me, at least. So yeah, I liked it about as much as I was expecting based on my previous experience with her books, but not as much as I was hoping, because I was hoping that this would turn around my opinion of her books. So there were things that I liked about this world. I think that it had a lot of interesting concepts, especially around the history and this idea of having this historical event that people kind of interpret differently, and then that creates these different religions, because that's a thing that happens in the real world. So I thought that was an interesting idea, and I think that the history elements of the world building were really interesting and well done. The pacing was really weird in this. I know a lot of people have talked about the pacing in this book. It gets progressively faster over the course of the book, so the first like 400 pages are painfully slow. There's a pretty good section in the middle, and then the last like 150 pages are really rushed, including the final battle scene. It just felt very anticlimactic, and like this moment that we had been building up to and this villain that they had been hyping for so long felt like it really wasn't that climactic or really that difficult to defeat. It just sort of like happened really fast and was over. I also felt like two of the perspectives that we were following were unnecessary. I don't think that the two exiles that we were following, Loth or Nicolaus Roos, I don't think either of them were really necessary to the plot. Nicolaus Roos, who's the alchemist, specifically, I just hated his perspective. Every time I saw that it was his chapter, I was just annoyed and I wanted to skip his chapter so badly. I didn't, but I was annoyed the entire time I read them because I don't like his character, and he was so irrelevant to this story and was so unnecessary. I wish that the book had really just focused on Eid and Tane. The world building was kind of unevenly done. As I said, the history of this world I think was well done. It was really interesting and I liked that, but I didn't feel like the present world was very well described or built out. I didn't have a good feel for what the world was like currently. The romance in this, I really didn't care about the romance. I wasn't invested in it. And my last thing that I just was annoyed about is that there are at least two ridiculous villain monologues in this book that happen during action scenes where like they're just like, okay, let's stop the momentum of this action scene so that this villain can monologue and just info dump about the history of the world, or option B is tell you their entire plan and exactly how they're gonna do it so you know exactly how to stop them. It just was so ridiculous. Anyways, I didn't hate this book. It was just that it was very fine. I gave it 3 stars. I'm thinking I might do a dedicated review for it, but this was the bullet point version of what I thought about the book. And then I read The Wicker King by Kay Ancrum, which is very different from Priory. This is a YA contemporary that is primarily following 2 friends who are these boys who are in high school, and they really rely on each other because both of them don't really have strong parental figures, and so they're trying to kind of make their way through life really relying on each other. And one of them is starting to have these really vivid hallucinations where he's kind of seeing this like magical fantasy world that's overlaying the real world, and he's increasingly having difficulty telling the difference between reality and hallucination. And his friend is trying to help him, but they don't want to go like ask anyone else for help. When the one who's having hallucinations starts to believe that there is a quest that they need to complete, and that somehow this quest will help him and maybe stop the hallucinations. And so his friend helps him, and it kind of pulls them down this like dark path as he is like descending into increasingly intense hallucinations and mental illness. And one of the things that's interesting about this book is that as you read it, the book actually gets like darker and darker as his mental illness gets worse and worse, which was really interesting. Part of it as you're reading. There are also like pictures of the characters and notes and detention slips, and there are even playlists for different characters in here. But yeah, this book, I ended up really enjoying it. I'm not surprised because I really loved The Weight of the Stars, which is also by Kay Ancrum. This is the second book that I have read from her. And I would definitely say this one is darker than The Weight of the Stars, but there's something about the way that she writes her characters that I find very compelling. I became very attached to these characters. They have a very unhealthy codependent relationship with one another, but they also are really lacking parental figures or just adults in their lives that they can rely on, and so they kind of don't have anyone else, and they only have each other, so they've developed this codependent relationship. So you understand why, but it also is like very not healthy for them. But overall, I did really enjoy this. I find her characters really compelling and her writing just really easy to breeze through. I always read her books so quickly, and I gave this 4 stars. I also read the short story that goes along with this, which the name is escaping me, but I'll put the cover on the screen. But that kind of retells a few of the scenes in this book from the perspective of Jack, who is the character who is having the hallucinations, because this whole book is told from the perspective of August. And so you get to see some of the scenes from Jack's perspective and see like some of the hallucinations that he was experiencing during certain scenes of the book. But then it also tells the backstory of this like magical fantasy world that he was seeing and the story that he was kind of experiencing and aware of. So that was the short story that went with this. Then I read a graphic novel, which I really loved, which was The Daughters of Ys by M.T. Anderson and Joe Rio. So this is a retelling of a legend, which I think is called like The Legend of Ys or something like that, which is about this almost Atlantis-like city that is beneath the ocean in a way. So in this story, it starts with this woman making a deal with a king, essentially saying that she'll save his life if he will kill her husband, and if he kills her husband, who's a wizard, then she will give him her husband's lands. He agrees to the deal, he kills the wizard, and after he does that, they get married, and she builds him this magical city by pushing back the ocean and building these giant walls. So they have this like magical city, and she harnesses like sea monsters to protect their borders, and they live like that for a long time. And it skips forward then to years later when the queen dies. And at that point, they have 2 daughters, and because the queen has died, it kind of changes the dynamic between the sisters, because now it's going to be kind of who is taking on responsibility now that the queen is gone. The oldest sister, who is the one that will inherit this kingdom, kind of just wants to run into the forest and commune with nature and not be a part of court. And the younger sister is very interested in court intrigue and also in taking up some of the magical elements and of what their mother used to do, which ends up being much darker magic than she expected. And I just really enjoyed this graphic novel. For one thing, I love the art style. See if I can find like a good picture of what the art in this looks like. I really liked the art style. I loved the atmosphere of this. I think it did the character, like the sister relationship so well that there is this real strain on this sister relationship. I read the original legend, or about the original legend after having read this, and it definitely made some changes to especially the king and his role in this and how culpable he was in the whole situation of what was going on. And I really liked the changes that were made. However, I don't feel like the author fully followed through with some of the changes that were made. There were certain things that I didn't like about the ending and kind of who was punished for certain things that happened. But overall, I really enjoyed this. I really liked the way that this was done. So I gave this one 4 stars. Then I read The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. This is a speculative short story collection that I was reading as part of the Genre Raiders book club. And I ended up really enjoying this more than I was expecting to, because I don't usually like short story collections, but this one was really, really good. And I think one of the things that made it work better for me than most short story collections that I read is that I listen to the audiobook. I mean, I think that these are great short stories to begin with, but also I think just for me, listening to the audiobook increased my enjoyment of it. But I really enjoyed pretty much all of the stories in this collection. There were some that were definitely very difficult to read, especially the ones that dealt with some historical events. I would definitely say look up content warnings for this book. I'll put some content warnings for things that stood out to me while I was reading it down in the description if you want to check that out. But yeah, there are definitely some very difficult things that happen in this collection, but I just thought it was really good, and I really overall enjoyed every story in this collection, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I read The Word for World is Forest by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is a sci-fi story that is about a planet that is completely covered in forest, and there is a indigenous group of people who live on this planet who are very peaceful. They don't even really have a concept for what murder is, but then the humans, which is humans spelled with a Y, come to this planet and enslave the people and cut down their trees and start harvesting their planet for resources, essentially. And then these people who are from the planet have to figure out how to defend themselves and figure out what they're going to do, because they need to defend themselves, but that would mean betraying their way of life, which is usually very peaceful. And so it's about them kind of figuring out that the humans are terrible and that they have to fight back and what that costs them. And it has a lot about really the violence of colonization, and that it is not solely physical violence, but it also is the violence of destroying the culture and way of life and wisdom of the people that are being invaded and colonized. So I ended up having some kind of mixed feelings about this book, because on the one hand, Ursula K. Le Guin is an incredible writer, a pillar of science fiction. Like, the book is obviously incredibly well written, and it accomplishes what it means to accomplish in its discussion of colonization. I think it also definitely conveyed like the horrific nature of what is happening to these people and all of that. But I also just, whenever I read her books, this is the 3rd book that I've read from her, I always end up feeling, I guess, a little underwhelmed in regards to the characters, because I've said I am very much a character-focused reader, and I feel like this is more of a concept book, which happens with a lot of classic sci-fi, and so I can appreciate the concept of what it did, and I think that it's very well executed, but there weren't particular characters that I was attached to. Not to say that I didn't have feelings about this book or that I didn't feel for the characters in it. So I gave it 3.5 stars because there was something else that I was wanting out of this, but I also think that it's very likely that what I was wanting out of it in terms of character work is not what the book was setting out to do, and that's totally fine. I think it accomplished what it meant to accomplish, and I think that it is really good. So okay, so I had to replace my camera battery, so this might be a slightly different angle, but the next book that I finished in May was the first book in the Sacred Hunt duology. The first book is Hunter's Oath. This is a bind-up of both books by Michelle West, and this is the first series in this larger world that she is writing in. She has multiple series that are set in this world. I don't actually know what the world itself is called, or if there's like a name for all of the books collectively. But Michelle West is an author that I've been meaning to read for a while, and there are various opinions on where you should start with her books. Some people say to start with this duology, but some people say this is not a good place to start because it is by far her weakest books in this series or set in this world, and that, you know, her later books are much better and that she really improves as an author and storyteller and all of that. I decided to start here. So this is set in a fantasy world that worships a hunter god, and this hunter god gives hunting powers to certain people, to the nobility, who are the hunter lords. And so the hunter lords have these special like hunting powers. They have like a psychic connection to their hunting dogs, and they also have this special magical bond to someone who is called their hunt brother. So each hunter lord who has these magic powers has a hunt brother that they're connected to, who's just like a regular person, who essentially is meant to kind of like keep them grounded and make sure they don't get weird with their magic. So they give them these like special powers, and also the hunter god gives the people of this land like prosperity and crops and all of that. But in exchange, once a year, the hunter lords have to participate in the sacred hunt, at which time the hunters become hunted and the hunter god gets to hunt down and kill one of them. And at the beginning of the book, we're following this young boy named Stephen, who has been chosen to become the hunt brother to a young hunter lord. The two of them are around the same age. They're both kids at the time, and they grow up together, they train together. And so this is following them through childhood and like young adulthood as they are becoming hunter lord and hunt brother. But then in addition to that, we're following this other perspective who is this woman named Yvain, who's kind of a time traveler. And so she kind of like comes in at different points in time, at different points in their timeline and her timeline, and there's something that she's trying to prevent from happening or make sure it happens. It was very unclear as to why she's time traveling and what she's trying to accomplish with it and all of that, but she's time traveling for some reason, and trying to protect the two of them because they are somehow going to be wrapped up in whatever this is that she's involved in. This book did not have a very clear central plot to it, which would not have been so much of a problem if I had been more into other elements of the book. It wasn't terrible, it just like didn't really do a lot for me. I think that the characters and relationships had potential. They seemed interesting. I like this idea of these hunt brothers who have this really strong bond. I like that it has this kind of nature magic with this hunter god, and they have animal companions and they can kind of have a mind connection with their dogs. Like, there are a lot of elements about this that I liked. I just think that it was underdeveloped, or just didn't make the most of all of these elements, and I just wasn't very invested in it. So I kind of just read it and it was fine, and it didn't make a big impression. So I think I gave the first book 3 stars. I'm planning to read the second book hopefully in June, but at this point really, I'm just hoping to get to the next series, and I'm hoping I will really like that. I think after this duology, I'm going to move on to the House Wars. Anyways, the point is, the first book in this series was okay. I gave it 3 stars. I'm gonna read the second one. I'm expecting it also to be just sort of okay, but I have high hopes for the next series. And then the final book that I completed in May was Markswoman by Rati Mehrotra. This is the first book in a fantasy duology, and in it we are following this like society of assassins who are called markswomen. Our main character has been training to become a markswoman, and in this world, this society of assassins is actually kind of part of the governance of the world. They hold a lot of political power and sway, and at the beginning of this book, our main character Kyra has, as I said, grown up in this society of assassins. She's been training to become a markswoman, and she is now on her first mission as an assassin. And when she gets back, she gets inducted as a markswoman, but then she finds out that there are some things that are not what she thought they were, and then soon after, the head of the markswomen is killed, and she thinks that she knows, our main character thinks she knows who did it, and so she has to escape in order to escape this person who knows that she knows, and she has to figure out what to do and how best to save the markswomen and stop this person, and also maybe finds a love interest along the way. And this book had a really interesting world. The premise of this world is kind of that there was some like alien race that came to this world a long time ago, and at this point that alien race is gone, and it's been like hundreds of years, and no one really knows that much about them anymore, and people don't really understand how their technology works, so now their technology is kind of treated as magic. And so the markswomen have these special knives that are made out of this special metal that came from these alien people, but is out of this like telepathic metal, so they're able to like psychically bond with these knives, and that's part of being a markswoman. But also there are these portals that are like these doors that are portals to like different places around this world. I did think that the world was really interesting, but I did feel like sometimes this kind of alien technology felt a little bit like a shortcut in the world building. So I would be really curious if in the second book they develop that more, because I would like to know more about how this works. I did think though that there were elements of the world building that were really well fleshed out, especially their religious beliefs and how that plays into this world and this culture and the markswomen, and you know and their beliefs and their mission and all of that, and I really enjoyed that part of it. I had a lot of fun reading this one. I'm deciding whether I'm going to read the second book or not, because I did enjoy this one, and it definitely ended on a cliffhanger, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. So those are all of the books that I read in May. If you've read any of these, I'd love to chat with you about it in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!